Before we begin, let's get a clear understanding of who's who when it comes to selling your timber. There are four major players. A registered forester is any person who has been registered and licensed by the Georgia Board of Registration for Foresters. Registration requires a combination of education, practical experience, and successful passage of a registration exam. You can review the State of Georgia Code and the rules of professional conduct for registered foresters. In Georgia, a person must be registered to use the term forester while providing management services on land that they do not own. There are exceptions, such as industrial foresters working on company land. A consulting forester is a self-employed forester who, for a fee, assists private landowners with forest management practices. Now, according to the Society of American Foresters, a consultant is a professional forester whose services are available to the general public on a contract or fee basis, with that fee being paid by the client. A consultant performs all work in compliance with legal requirements for the practice of forestry, such as registration and licensing. A consultant remains free from conflicts of interest, for instance, wood procurement, to serve the best and sole interest of his clients. Some consultants provide general assistance, while others may specialize. A timber buyer may or may not be a registered forester and normally is a representative for the purchaser. Now, the timber buyer functions as a coordinator for moving wood through the supply chain. The timber buyer matches the demand from the mills with the available supply, and he directs logging activity to ensure that interruption to the supply chains do not occur. A logger normally contracts with a timber buyer to harvest the timber. Now, the logger should be Master Timber Harvester certified and adhere to all of Georgia's best management practices for forestry, or BMPs. For many landowners, selling timber from their forest land may be a once or twice in a lifetime event. You want to avoid the temptation to make a quick sale to a friendly buyer. Think about what you're going to do and don't be pressured into making a decision. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with the tips and recommendations that will make the sale a more satisfying event. To ensure this happens, you must do a thorough job of planning, preparation, and marketing. Now, we will cover 8 areas that can help make your next timber sale a success and improve your profit margin. During this presentation, we will cover the following topics, but remember, this list is not all-inclusive. Use a registered forester or a consultant who is a registered forester. Know the tax implications. Develop a forest management plan. Conduct pre-harvest planning. Determine a selling method. Develop a written contract. Monitor the harvest, and conduct a sale closeout. Every forest landowner has different expectations and needs, which make specifics of every timber sale unique. Whatever your expectations are should be reflected in the writing of a contract. Now, selling timber can be a source of great satisfaction to a landowner, or it could be a source of surprise, frustration, and stress, especially for those landowners who make timber sales infrequently. Relying on the expertise of a registered forester or a consultant that is a registered forester to help with that harvest planning and timber sale can prevent surprises to either the seller or the buyer. Now, studies have shown that in most cases, non-industrial landowners who used a professional forester received a greater return on their timber sale than landowners who did not enlist the assistance of a professional. You want to make sure that you receive the best value for your timber. Therefore, before you select someone to help with the timber sale, you should ensure that they will represent your best interest. Honest and open communication, coupled with respect for information given in confidence, is essential to good service. They should fully disclose and resolve any existing or potential conflicts of interest and keep proprietary information confidential unless you authorize its disclosure. To find a registered forester or a consultant, You can go to the Georgia Forestry Commission's Directories database, located on the GFC website at www.gatrees.org. The Georgia chapter of the Association of Consulting Foresters at www.gaacf.com, or the Georgia State Board of Registration for Foresters at the web address listed on your screen. Competent tax advice should be sought well before the sale for clarification of current tax laws. The IRS has different property categories that define how standing timber may be held, as personal use property, investment property, or business property. Tax provisions differ for each of these categories. Holding timber or forest property for personal use without a profit motive is a disadvantage tax-wise because of the limits on deductions. One of the best ways to document that you have a profit motive is a written management plan. You need to understand how timber management, reforestation tax provisions, depreciation, cost share payments, timber casualty losses, timber depletion may impact your tax liability. It is recommended that prior to making the sale, a landowner should contact a CPA. Now, there are various sources of information that landowners can access on the internet. The Georgia Cooperative Extension System, myforest.com, and the U.S. Forest Service Cooperative Forestry have tax information that may help you better understand the tax implications of selling your timber. You should develop a forest management plan prior to considering harvesting your timber. If you currently have a forest management plan, you should make sure that it is up to date before beginning the timber sale process. Properly managed forests yield more timber. They have a higher net present value, and they suffer fewer environmental impacts. They also enhance wildlife habitat more than non-managed forest. Utilizing the services of a registered forester or a consultant who is a registered forester can provide that level of expertise needed to assist you in developing a management plan that meets your objectives. A management plan can be viewed as your roadmap for the future to help ensure that you have sustainably managed your forest. Forest management plans also required for third-party certification and future markets such as woody biomass or carbon sequestration. Now, woody biomass is the trees and woody plants, including limbs, tops, needles, leaves, and other woody parts grown in a forest, woodland, or rangeland environment that are the byproducts of forest management. Carbon sequestration is the removal of carbon from the atmosphere. This can be accomplished by storing atmospheric carbon in vegetation, water, and in the ground. Now, your management plan should include the following. Who prepared the management plan? You want to clearly state your objectives. Describe the current forest conditions. Describe your desired forest conditions. Include practices and activities aimed at reaching the desired forest condition. Document a feasible strategy and timeline for practice and activity implementation. Describe any suggested monitoring activities to be done by the forester or landowner. Be developed for a specified management period that adequately allows for progress with the landowner's long-term stewardship objectives. A management plan must consider, describe, and evaluate resource elements present and their importance to the landowner. Elements to consider should include soil and water, biological diversity, aesthetic quality, recreation, timber, fish and wildlife, threatened and endangered species, forest health, archaeological, cultural, and historic sites, wetlands, as well as fire and carbon cycles. Other areas should include in the plan recommendations for each resource element present, prescriptions or treatments that are stand or site-specific, An ownership map that is drawn to scale, or a photo that accurately depicts vegetation cover types, hydrology, and other significant forest-related resources, with a legend. Now, the remainder of this presentation will provide recommendations on how the timber sale can be a source of great satisfaction versus one of surprise, frustration, or stress. Pre-harvest planning will ensure that your forest management objectives and goals are not compromised. It will reduce the opportunity for misunderstanding between you, your representative, and the buyer and/or logger. And it will help to ensure that the harvest will maximize financial returns for all parties, protect water quality, and maintain or enhance forest productivity. A timber crew should be part of the management plan or pre-harvest plan to determine exactly what timber you have. Clearly mark property and sale boundary lines to ensure that the logger does not cut non-designated trees and/or trespass onto the neighbor's property. The use of topographic maps will assist you in identifying streams, existing roads, steep grades, and road access. Soils maps will help identify wet areas and soils that can easily be damaged during the logging process. The use of topo and soils maps can also help in planning not only the time of year to harvest, but also the potential location for log decks, stream crossings, culverts, and temporary roads. You should designate areas adjacent to streams as streamside management zones, or SMZs, where timber harvesting should be controlled or even avoided. Before harvesting begins, conduct an on-the-ground meeting with the buyer and logger to review the pre-harvest plan. The consequences of not having a pre-harvest plan include time and money spent on unintended problems, degrading forest conditions, illegal activities, declining water quality, more forest land impacted by skidding, degrading post-harvest condition of forest soils, trees more susceptible to disease or insect damage, declining regeneration of seedlings or saplings. You should always consult with a registered forester when drafting a timber sale contract. A written contract is essential and will reduce surprises to you and the buyer and/or logger. And preparing a contract encourages forethought and planning, and it will minimize difficulties and ensure that the transaction meets your expectations. Now, a contract is not a substitute for good faith and fair dealing between parties, but is the framework in which good faith and fair dealing can operate in an orderly and effective manner. The following items should be included in a timber sale contract: timber description, payments, damage clauses and penalties, logging clauses, sale and harvest, documentation of the timber removed, especially when the sale is paid on a per-unit basis. In the contract, state the exact location and legal description of the timber sale area. Now, an accurate legal description of the timber sale area is very important to a timber sale and harvest contract. The most significant factor in maximizing your sale is the classification of timber products that you are selling. Now, these products include things such as pulpwood, chip and saw logs, veneer logs, poles, and are determined by species, size, and the quality of your timber, and they can vary in price greatly. The contract should state at whose expense marking will be done, how the boundaries and corners will be marked, and which party will be liable to neighboring areas for trespass cutting. Now, selling your timber on a per unit basis, if you choose to sell your timber by the unit, you'll need to specify the units of measurement to be used, who is to do the measuring, and where. Measurements may be made by one of several different methods, such as log scales, weight, cords, or it could be a combination of these. A per unit sale should specify that all timber harvested is to be measured and paid for according to its most valuable product use. Determining which sale method is best for each sale involves many factors, such as selective versus clear-cut harvest, is the timber marked, and the current market demands. Now, a forester can help decide which is the best for a given situation. The type of harvest. You need to specify the type of harvest you desire, and if the timber is marked, how it is marked. For example, if you're marking a seed tree cut, you may specify that all trees banded with blue paint 4.5 feet above the ground, which is their diameter at breast height, or DBH, are seed trees and will not be cut or damaged. If you are thinning or using a select cut, you may want to designate the trees to be cut with one paint spot above DBH and another below stump height if you're doing an operator select. Now, the following are provisions to consider included in the timber sale contract, and be aware that some restrictions placed on harvesting may lower the price that someone is willing to pay you for your timber. So you need to be reasonable in your expectations. Clearly state in the contract an agreed upon purchase price and a method of payment. Now, selling your timber on a lump sum basis. If you're going to sell your timber on a lump sum basis, you need to specify that you desire payment in full at the time that the contract is executed. Or, if you're deferring payment, the exact dates that you expect payment. Now, a lump sum sale is the outright sale of standing timber for a fixed dollar amount, agreed upon in advance, and the sale price is not a function of the volume that is cut. Selling timber on a per unit basis. If you decide to sell your timber on a per unit basis, you need to specify payment per unit for each species and product, as well as timing of payments. You need to additionally agree upon a method and a place of scaling and measurement. Also, you should require in the contract that the buyer provide you with a complete accounting of all species and products by delivery point that are harvested from the sale. Now, a per unit price is determined in advance, but the amount of timber to be harvested is not. So income from this sale is based strictly on the volume that is actually harvested. The time period for cutting timber. Normal time periods for cutting timber are 12 to 24 months. There can be provisions for extensions, but the details and the timing for an extension should be defined. There is usually a cost to the buyer for an extension. You can consider the value of additional growth if the buyer holds the timber for more than 12 months. Damage to your land or remaining timber. During the actual harvesting operation, the logging equipment may cause damage to the land or the remaining timber stand. A certain degree of damage should be expected. You may want to visit a comparable site that has been recently harvested by the logger who will harvest your tract. And you may want to state your damage requirements, such as no more than a maximum number of trees per acre have visible skidding damage, or you may want to specify the acceptable depth in inches of skidding ruts. Now, be aware that the more stringent damage restrictions will usually result in a more expensive harvesting cost, which will reduce the price that you can receive for your timber. Access restrictions. Specify any restrictions you have for ingress and egress to your property. For example, if you desire that the logger not use a certain entrance to your property, such as through your pasture or beside your house, you need to specify this requirement in your contract. If you're making a partial cut, include a penalty for cutting non-designated trees. If you specify in the contract a dollar value per merchantable tree volume for the cutting of non-designated trees, later problems will be more easily resolved. The usual penalty for such damage is double or triple the stumpage rate. Now, removing the canopy or overstory. If you intend to remove the canopy or overstory to allow the future stand room to grow, You should likewise specify a penalty for failure to cut designated trees. You want to detail the specific desires of the buyer and the seller. Now, these clauses can be of any degree of detail, but once again, the more detailed the logging clause, the more costly it will be to harvest your timber, and you may receive a lower stumpage price from the buyer. The method of logging. You may specify a certain method of logging to be used, such as forward system instead of tree length skidding, to minimize damage to your residual stand during the thinning operation. Road maintenance and skid trail layout. If you desire that roads be maintained to a minimum standard, refer to that standard in the contract. A usual requirement is to return the roads to as good or better condition than before the logging occurred. Address your expectations for repair of fences and other special places that may be damaged during the harvesting operation. You want to reduce the possibilities for non-point source pollution. You should specify that all logging be done in accordance with Georgia's best management practices for forestry. Now, for more information on BMPs, visit our website at www.gatrees.org. Stump height and top diameter harvested. If stump height and top diameter harvested is important to you, you should specify in inches the maximum stump height allowed or top diameter. If you want to easily machine plant your next timber stand, allow a maximum stump height over which the tree planter can easily maneuver. Now, selling your timber based on a unit volume. If you're selling your timber based on unit volume, be sure to specify the maximum top diameter that you will allow to remain in the woods. Of course, cleanup. Include a statement requiring the removal of all litter and trash from the logging operation. You may also want to specify that logging debris be scattered back over the site versus piled at the deck. A timber sale and harvest contract is a tool that allows a buyer and a seller to legally communicate their desires and requirements for a timber sale and logging operation. The contract should be expressed in clear and concise terms, leaving no room for confusion or ambiguity. Arrange a meeting with the buyer and logger so that you and your representative can point out any special restrictions that you have imposed. Walk the sale site to ensure that sale boundary lines and other restrictions are completely understood. Check the logging operation on a regular basis and inform the logging supervisor if you think that the terms of the contract are not being faithfully followed. Be reasonable in your expectations and the assignment of damage penalties. In some instances, the amounts you receive for your timber may be reduced due to excessive restrictions. Some other contract provisions to consider: the name and address of the buyer, the date the contract is executed, declaration of the seller's ownership and right to convey, which may include a title abstract and insurance, clarification regarding ownership of byproducts, liability insurance of all contractors and subcontractors, statement of who is responsible for paying severance tax, the statement of who suffers the loss if the timber is destroyed or stolen, provisions for or against the assignment of the contract. Other contract provisions to consider: notarization of the contract, the recording of the contract in the county courthouse, a performance bond or deposit collected from the buyer prior to the commencement of harvesting, to be held by a third party until the provisions of the contract are met. Now, a performance bond is an amount of money over and above the sale price posted by the buyer and held in escrow by the seller. Its purpose is to assure that the buyer abides by and fulfills all requirements of the contract. The necessity and the amount of the performance bond is going to depend on the number of factors, including the size and the value of the sale and the difficulty of the operation. Performance bonds should be properly returned at the completion of a properly executed harvest. You need to also require that the logger be Master Timber Harvester certified. As important as it is, the contract is only one of many issues that need to be considered when the decision to sell timber is being made. The following concerns should be considered and should have a bearing on the content of your contract. Do you have a clear title for the timber being sold? Have you established your tax basis for the land and the timber you plan to sell to claim your capital gains treatment? What are the market conditions for the products being sold or retained? How will the sale be marketed to receive the best price for the best job? Will there be any environmental issues such as wetland management or threatened and endangered species involved in this sale area? How will the sale area be accessed? You would not want large equipment utilizing trails or traveling on property outside your sale area. Site preparation and reforestation options. These topics are not all inclusive, but they show why pre-harvest planning are important. You and your agent should frequently inspect the harvesting operation to ensure that the contract terms are being fulfilled. Requiring a load-by-load accounting of forest products removed from your timber harvest sale area is a good business practice for you and the buyer. It provides you with a full accounting of what is harvested off of your property, and it helps to ensure that contractual terms are fulfilled. When you sell on a per-unit basis, a full accounting of what was removed during the harvest should be provided by the buyer. And you can designate how frequently you want that information, be it weekly, monthly, or at the end of the sale. Some of the minimum information received should include: each load of timber leaving a cutting sale site must receive a scale ticket by Georgia law, and landowners should receive a copy of each ticket. The county and the state that the timber was cut. The landowner's name, or if multiple landowners, the name of the estate where the timber is being cut. The date and time that forest products were loaded on the truck. The scale ticket number that corresponds with each load number to verify delivery of individual loads of forest product. The forest product type identified, for example, pine logs, pine poles, pine pulpwood, hardwood logs, hardwood pulp, chip and saw, woody biomass, and miscellaneous forest products. The destination of the first wood receiving facility that the forest product is being transported to. The name of the logging company, the wood dealer, or producer removing the forest products. Close out with the buyer or logger. A notice of completion of harvest from the buyer can be very helpful in removing any question if the buyer considers the harvest complete and relinquishes the remaining biomass back to the owner. Review and agree on action and timing to address any land or timber damages related to harvesting operations. Address any other issues related to non-compliance of the contract, and ensure compliance with best management practices, or BMPs. Now, this timeline summarizes the steps that we have discussed and can be used as a guide for most timber sales. Most landowners will harvest timber only 1 to 3 times in their lifetime. So it's important to educate yourselves on all aspects connected to preparing for a timber sale. Some key points to remember. Educate yourself concerning tax implications related to selling your timber. This is also important when you consider timber management expenses, reforestation, depreciation, and cost share payments. To avoid surprises, frustration, and stress, you want to work with a registered forester or a consultant that has your best interest as his or her top priority. They should fully disclose and resolve any existing or potential conflicts of interest that would prevent them from representing your best interest. Understanding the current market prices. There are numerous sources available that will provide you with relatively current pricing information. To obtain local market pricing and obtain the highest value for your sale, it is generally best to bid your sale. Pre-harvest planning will reduce opportunities for misunderstanding between landowners and loggers. It will also help to ensure that the harvest maximizes financial returns as well as protects water quality and soil productivity. Using a logger who is certified master timber harvester will help ensure that your trees are effectively harvested and merchandised in a manner that fully utilizes BMPs. Ask for references and business experience, and be aware of what your property may look like after the cut by visiting a site that the logger has already harvested. Always use a contract. It is a legal document that will protect your interest as well as that of the buyer and the logger. For more information, contact the agencies listed on your screen: the Georgia Forestry Commission, the University of Georgia, the U.S. Forest Service, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, Tree Farm, the Georgia Forestry Association, the Association of Consulting Foresters, and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Information in this presentation can also be found in a 4-page brochure, and this can be found on the Georgia Forestry Commission's public website at gatrees.org. We would like to thank the following agencies for making this webinar possible: the Alabama Forestry Commission, the Georgia Forestry Commission, the Georgia Cooperative Extension System, and the U.S. Forest Service Cooperative Forestry. If you have questions regarding selling your timber, you should contact a registered forester or your local Georgia Forestry Commission management forester.